In a way, I'm glad I held to my policy of not reviewing Tenet until home release, owing to the studio and the director's insistence at a dangerous theatrical-only release during the height of the COVID pandemic. Sure, it means I'm now running this one now long past the point that anyone actually gives a damn, since it turns out somebody picked the wrong movie to decide to stake their would-you-risk-your-life-for-it reputation on, but at least it can be judged with a greater degree of separation from all that cultural baggage, i.e. an overlong, frustratingly ambitious, but also drab and thematically shallow experience that you can watch at home on the couch, as opposed to an overlong, frustratingly ambitious, but also drab and thematically shallow experience that's big and loud enough that you don't much notice because you're also full of Icy. Oh god, I miss Icy so much. But yeah, regarded apart from its brief additional notoriety as a pandemic-era culture war talking point, Tenet basically represents another burrowing down by Christopher Nolan into the particular brand of blockbuster genre re-exploration that he at this point could be argued to have refined into a subclass that belongs largely to himself, in the sense that one can understand colloquially the meaning of a Hitchcock film or an M. Night Shyamalan film without actually seeing the film in question, or in some cases regarding films not made by the filmmakers they're identified with. To wit, knowing that Tenet is a Christopher Nolan film rather than simply a film that happens to have been directed by Christopher Nolan is to be unsurprised to learn that it's an extremely serious drama with heavy components of action, detective, mystery, thriller, and either science fiction or questionable reality to its scenario, features a protagonist defined more by action than by character detail, and a narrative played out in the form of a logic puzzle that feels like a challenge set by the storytellers both to the audience and to themselves, i.e. tell a story where the main character can't retain memories, or backwards, or with an unreliable main point of view, or in the format of a magic trick, a story with multiple layers of consciousness where time moves at varying speeds, and increasingly where these exercises in logical storytelling gymnastics reveal themselves as elaborate allegories for themselves, or rather the psychology and creative intent behind their maker, as in how Inception seems to at least in part have been an explanation of how Christopher Nolan approaches building and maintaining audience immersion in movies like Inception. Tenet, on the other hand, almost feels like Nolan, here serving as director and sole credited screenwriter, is aiming to deconstruct his own largely deconstructionist portfolio, boiling down his formula to the barest elements while wrapping what thin skin of plot remains around one of the most brain-bending conceptual conceits he's yet constructed for a plot MacGuffin, which is unfortunately a nice way of saying that it feels like somebody wrote a moderately insightful parody of a Christopher Nolan movie, which the actual Christopher Nolan has adapted sans punchline into the real thing, save that it's hard to think that even this most self-serious of filmmakers isn't having at least some fun at his own expense by only ever identifying his main character, even out loud, as the protagonist. Now, some discussion of plot and what our central story conceit actually is here is unavoidable, though it's not a spoiler for any of the actual twists or mysteries presented in the narrative, just so we're clear. Especially since this time, while still at great pains to make it clear that he's a very smart boy who grasps the actual theoretical and completely made-up science, math, and physics concepts by which this is all supposed to work, plus the eyeball twist roadmap it must have taken to actually keep what it does to the plot in order, Nolan graciously allows a number of supporting players to repeatedly follow up their exposition dumps to John David Washington's The Protagonist by reassuring him and us that we shouldn't really try to understand any of it. To the point of it, the protagonist is an agent of, well, that also doesn't matter, tasked with a mission to thwart a potential terrorist plot that involves the use of weapons, bombs, guns, assassins, etc. that have been through some yet unknown super science inverted, meaning that they are actually moving backwards in the space-time continuum as individual objects while still being physically present in the present, since logically if they're moving backwards in time, they originated somewhere forward in time, they think. Basically, if you wanted to pick one up, you can't. You have to position yourself mentally and physically such to create the immediate future where you will drop it, so its reverse motion is that it will be going back to you, and if that already hurts your head, that's probably why we aren't meant to think that hard about the rest of it. But you do basically get what it means in practical terms. Yeah, a really, really hyper-literal version of a time travel concept that creates an obviously killer gimmick for cool on-screen visuals where some stuff goes backwards and the other stuff goes forward. Gunfights where you win by getting the bullet to return to the gun, fistfights where one guy is unfighting from hits they already took, backwards car chase, backwards versus forwards army shootout. I mean, that sounds sick as hell. You throw those in between some compelling characters we care about, like the fun crew in Inception, and a dramatic story where the theme is reinforced by the narrative, so it's not just a screenwriting gimmick, like how Memento was actually about the meaning and concept of memory and forgetting and how we choose to frame what we recall about ourselves, and you've got another big winner here, right? Yeah, they didn't do that this time. Whether by choice, i.e. the general down-to-basics nature of the overall film, there just isn't much to hold one's interest in Tenet once you've got a handle on the concept, such as it can be gotten, and the novelty, however genuinely impressive, of the carefully plotted-out backwards-forwards choreography and the stunt staging has been absorbed and worn off, which for me was well before the seemingly endless big final action scene. There's this idea of a through line we're meant to care about, an eventual, really this again bit of exposition for what the bad guys are supposedly all about. It gestures impotently at the thematic relevance and more so topicality, while the protagonist doesn't really have an internal characterization, seemingly by design. Let it not be said that the extremely talented Washington doesn't prove more than capable of making us feel like he at least cares what happens to Elizabeth Debicki, also very good here as an endangered informant, and the legitimately scene-stealing sidekick Robert Pattinson. Less fun is Kenneth Branagh as the on-screen face of the bad guys, who mainly comes off like they just threw every Russian villain cliche into a box and said, done. As is so often the case, case, Nolan is too good of a technician, the cast too talented overall, and everyone clearly had too much of Warner Brothers' pre-plague money to spend for this to have been a complete failure. So it's really more of a frustrating, empty style exercise where even the conceit feels like it took a lot more work than the actual payoff is really worth. And again, wouldn't have been the case if any of the spectacle was happening to anyone we cared about, which makes this about as below average as this pedigree of production can really manage. 4 out of 10. If you waited this long, I'd keep waiting.